You know, some cars just stick with you. Cars that don't just show up and win races, but make a lasting impression, then vanish, leaving us all wondering what could have been. The Porsche 911 GT1 is one of those cars. It arrived, absolutely dominated, and then disappeared from racing almost as quickly as it came. Built in a time when manufacturers were pushing boundaries and bending the rules, the 911 GT1 wasn't just another race car. It was the embodiment of Porsche's ambition to stay on top. But like all great stories, there's more to it than just its victories. The Porsche 911 GT1 won at one of the most prestigious races in the world, the 24 Hours of Le Mans. But instead of defending its title, it vanished from the racing scene, leaving fans and critics alike wondering why. How could a car with so much potential simply disappear? Well, let's dive into the story of the Porsche 911 GT1 and unpack the twists, the triumphs, and the mysteries surrounding this iconic machine. To understand the 911 GT1, we've got to take a step back to the 1990s, a decade of significant change in motorsport, particularly in endurance racing. The 1980s had been dominated by the Group C era, where teams like Porsche, Jaguar, and Mercedes were creating some of the fastest and most technologically advanced race cars the world had ever seen. These cars, like Porsche's 956 and 962C, weren't just fast, they were untouchable. In fact, Porsche's 956 once clocked a top speed of 246 miles per hour at Le Mans, which is still considered one of the fastest recorded speeds in the race's history. But with all this speed and cutting-edge tech came a huge price tag. Teams were spending upwards of $10 million annually just to stay competitive. By 1992, the cost of competing in Group C had spiraled out of control, and the FIA knew they had to step in. So, in the early 1990s, the FIA introduced a new class, GT1 racing. The concept was simple: create a class based on production cars. These were supposed to be vehicles that people could actually buy and drive. The idea was the same cars tearing up the track could also, in theory, be parked in your driveway. But, as we all know, racing teams love to find loopholes, and this class was no exception. Instead of taking road cars and turning them into race cars, manufacturers like Porsche, McLaren, and Mercedes decided to flip the script. They built race cars first, then modified them just enough to slap a license plate on and call them road legal. Porsche saw this as an opportunity, not just to compete, but to dominate. By the early 90s, Porsche was in a bit of a pickle. The iconic 911, while a fantastic road car, wasn't cutting it against the competition in the GT1 class. Porsche's engineers realized they couldn't just modify a road-going 911 and expect it to win against monsters like the McLaren F1 GTR, which was purpose-built for the track. The McLaren F1 GTR had flipped the entire game on its head. Built around a lightweight carbon fiber chassis, it was powered by a 6.1-liter BMW V12 engine, producing around 627 horsepower. And it wasn't just fast on paper. At Le Mans in 1995, the McLaren F1 GTR won outright, even though it was designed as a road car. That victory sent shockwaves through the motorsport world. Suddenly, every major manufacturer knew they had to step up their game. Porsche's solution? The 911 GT1. But unlike the McLaren, the 911 GT1 wasn't a road car first. It was built from the ground up as a race car. Porsche engineers kept the car's name tied to the 911 lineage, but truthfully, the 911 GT1 had little in common with the standard 911. The biggest change? The engine layout. The 911 GT1 was designed as a mid-engine car, unlike the traditional rear engine setups of the 911. This change dramatically improved the car's balance and weight distribution, making it far more competitive on the track. The heart of the car was a 3.2-liter twin-turbocharged flat-six engine. In race trim, it produced a healthy 600 horsepower and was paired with a 6-speed sequential gearbox. This setup allowed the car to hit top speeds north of 205 miles per hour. For a GT1 car in the mid-1990s, those numbers were seriously impressive. But here's the kicker. To meet FIA homologation rules, Porsche had to build road-legal versions of the car, which they dubbed the 911 GT1 Strassen version. Now calling it road-legal might be a stretch. Sure, it had 536 horsepower, and Porsche had added a few concessions to meet safety standards, but this car was still a barely tamed race car. Only 25 units were made, and today they're worth millions, and considered some of the most desirable collector's cars in Porsche's history. 1996 marked the debut of the Porsche 911 GT1 at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Porsche had a solid history at Le Mans, with 13 overall wins before 1996, and they were eager to make their mark again. The 911 GT1 was the weapon they chose to do that with, and they didn't come alone. Porsche also supplied engines to the Jost racing team, which entered a pair of WSC 95 prototypes. These were essentially modified Group C cars, but they still had Porsche's flat-six engine under the hood, making them serious contenders. Throughout the race, the 911 GT1 proved its worth, running near the front for most of the event. It was fast and reliable, and by the end of the 24 hours, both factory GT1s finished second and third. But here's the twist. The only car that beat them? One of the Just Racing prototypes powered by, you guessed it, Porsche. The win didn't go directly to the 911 GT1, but it was a clear sign that Porsche was back in the game, and they were playing to win. This debut cemented the GT1 as a legitimate contender in the world of endurance racing. After Le Mans in '96, Porsche knew they had a solid foundation, and they weren't done yet. The engineers went back to the drawing board and created the 911 GT1 Evo, an evolved version of the original. The Evo had a few notable changes, most visibly the 996 generation headlights, which weren't just for looks. They improved aerodynamics, reduced drag, and increasing downforce underneath. The Evo got a revised suspension setup, which made it more stable at high speeds and better in the corners. The car also had a slight weight reduction, coming in at around 2,315 pounds. All of these tweaks were designed to give the Porsche an edge against their growing competition. By 1997, Mercedes had entered the GT1 fray with their brand new CLK GTR. This was no half measure. It was a purebred race car, designed from scratch for the track. Powered by a 6-liter V12 engine, producing 600 horsepower, the CLK GTR was capable of hitting speeds upwards of 215 miles per hour. McLaren, meanwhile, had further developed the F1 GTR, making it lighter and even more competitive. Le Mans 1997 was shaping up to be an all-out war between these manufacturers, and Porsche was right in the thick of it. Unfortunately, despite running strong early in the race, both of Porsche's 911 GTR Evo cars were forced to retire due to mechanical failures. It was a bitter disappointment for the team, especially after leading at several points. This was the harsh reality of endurance racing. Speed alone wasn't enough. The cars had to survive 24 hours of punishment. And in 1997, Porsche's GT1 Evo just couldn't go the distance. By 1998, Porsche knew they needed to make some drastic changes if they wanted to return to the top, and that's exactly what they did. The 911 GT1 underwent a complete redesign, resulting in the GT1 98, a car that was more of a prototype in disguise than a road-based racer. The GT1 98 featured a carbon fiber monocoque chassis, a first for Porsche in a production-based race car. This reduced the car's weight to just 2,094 pounds, making it significantly lighter than its competitors. The aerodynamics were also overhauled, with a focus on maximizing downforce and improving high-speed stability. Under the hood, the car retained its 3.2-liter twin-turbo flat-six engine, but due to new FIA regulations, power output was slightly reduced to around 550 horsepower. Even with less power, the GT1 98 was faster and more responsive than anything Porsche had ever built. Le Mans 1998 was a highly competitive race, with Porsche going up against heavyweights like the Mercedes CLK LM, Toyota GT1, and Nissan R390 GT1. These cars were all designed with one goal in mind: winning Le Mans. But endurance racing is as much about reliability as it is about speed. And while many of these cars showed early promise, they couldn't last. Both Mercedes CLK LMs were forced to retire early due to mechanical failures. The Toyota GT1, which had been the fastest car on the grid, suffered gearbox issues just hours from the finish. Through it all, the Porsche 911 GT1 98s ran like clockwork. And when the checkered flag fell, Porsche secured a stunning 1-2 finish, their 16th overall victory at Le Mans. It was the perfect redemption after the disappointment of 1997. With such a dominant performance in 1998, everyone expected Porsche to return and defend their title the following year. But, to the surprise of many, Porsche made the decision to pull out of the GT1 class entirely after their Le Mans win. So, why did Porsche, having built such a successful car, choose not to return? The answer lies in a combination of changing regulations and shifting priorities within the company. By 1999, the FIA had started phasing out the GT1 class in favor of the more advanced LMP Le Mans prototype class. LMP cars had fewer restrictions, allowing manufacturers to push the boundaries of engineering even further. But developing an LMP program was significantly more expensive than a GT1 program, often costing upwards of $50 million a year. Porsche had to decide whether it was worth the investment. At the same time, Porsche's road car division was undergoing a transformation. They had begun development on the Cayenne SUV, a project that many within the company believed would be crucial to securing Porsche's long-term financial future. And as history shows, the Cayenne went on to become one of Porsche's best-selling models, revolutionizing the company's business. The resources required to develop the Cayenne were significant, and Porsche's management decided to prioritize their road car business over continued involvement in top-tier motorsport. Ultimately, Porsche decided that the cost of continuing in LMP racing was too high, and they shifted their focus to other projects. While this meant the end of the 911 GT1 program, Porsche's decision to leave Le Mans after their 1998 victory was a calculated one, made in the best interest of the company's long-term success. The story of the Porsche 911 GT1 is one of innovation, triumph, and ultimately a strategic retreat. It showed up, changed the game, and won at one of the toughest races in the world before disappearing from the track. But even though its racing career was brief, the legacy of the 911 GT1 lives on. It helped shape Porsche's future in both racing and road cars, influencing the development of models like the Carrera GT and the modern 911 GT3. Porsche's decision to leave GT1 racing after their 1998 Le Mans victory marked the end of an era, but in many ways, it also laid the groundwork for Porsche's continued success in the automotive world. The lessons learned from the 911 GT1 project carried over into future road cars, and the technological innovations it brought to the track continue to influence Porsche's motorsport efforts today. The Porsche 911 GT1 remains one of the most iconic race cars in the company's history. victory. A car that pushed the boundaries, won at Le Mans, and then vanished, leaving behind a legacy that still captivates motorsports fans around the world.